Morning, class. Welcome to Riverbend University Graduate School of Theology. And today we want to begin a class that we are calling Riverbend (101), or if you want the more generic title, Why? Why Riverbend? Now, I meet people all the time, and I hear from people all the time who are new to Riverbend, and they find this place, and they're confused by it. They're confused many times in a good way. They realize there's something about this place, about this community, about this family that's odd, that's different, that's unusual, and I'm flattered by that. But if you ask any person who has any tenure at Riverbend Church, and there are many folks who have been here 20 and 30 and even 40 years, they will explain to you that the difference is intentional. It's on purpose. And they will use words like, it's because of grace, or they will say it's because you can come right where you are, just as you are. And they'll talk about how we welcome the battered, the bruised, the broken, and the bored. And this is a place where we believe that anyone can begin again. And we're all saying the same thing. The vocabulary may be different, but we're all talking about the distinctive. What makes Riverbend such an unusual place? You see, there's no right or wrong way to do church. There are countless ways to do it. You don't really have to study ecclesiology to understand that throughout the centuries there have been countless ways to do churches. There's denominations. There's the Methodist way and the Lutheran way and the Episcopalian way and the Anglican way and the Catholic way and the Unitarian way and the Reformed way and the Baptist way and the Bible Church way. And there are churches that are large churches and small churches. There's home churches, cell churches, and mega churches. There's punk rock churches. There's surfer churches. There's cowboy churches. I even spoke a couple times at a church just for NASCAR drivers. It's in the garage on Sunday morning before a race. My wife and I, years ago, drove up to central Oklahoma, and I preached in a church that was one family's church. It had been started in that town about 100 years ago, and everyone in that church was related to each other. And so there are all kinds of churches, but what makes one church different from another is the why. Why is the church there? So I want us to wrestle with and consider and study why Riverbend. Why is Riverbend the way it is? Why is Riverbend? What is our purpose? What is our mission? And what I want you to consider today is that the mission of Riverbend is really simple. The mission of Riverbend is to be a church for people who don't like church. Now, you may think of that and say, well, that's a dumb idea. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but Dave, Riverbend is a church. That's kind of the equivalent of having a butcher shop for vegans. It's like having selling neckties at a nudist colony or handing out ham sandwiches at a bar mitzvah. That doesn't make sense. But this is a church for people who feel like there is no church for them. It's a church for the misfits and the outcasts and the renegades, for the people who have been burned by and hurt by and worn out by and bored by and just aren't interested in pursuing their faith in a community. And they think there's no place that would really suit them. So for the next few weeks, this is what we're going to explore. We're going to explore, what does it mean to be Riverbend? What does it mean to be a culture of dissidents? And the blueprint that we are going to follow, the thing we are going to study, is the proposition that Riverbend is the church of the John 8 Jesus. Before we talk about that, I'd like to pray. Would you pray with me? Father in heaven, I would ask that the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart would be pleasing in your sight, and that you would use your words spoken by your servant and anointed by your Spirit to remind us of the beautiful work of grace that you are inviting us into. Pray that we would celebrate that and remember that today. Pray that for myself and for my family and for all of us here. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, if we are the church of the John 8 Jesus, that can be a problem. You see, the chapter in the gospel story that is written by John the Apostle, the 8th chapter is an incredibly controversial chapter. And it's not just controversial because of the content of the first story. It's controversial because there have been many biblical scholars down through history that believe the first 11 verses of John chapter 8 are not real. That the story in John chapter 8, verses 1 to 11, did not actually happen. The story in John chapter 8 in the Latin is called the pericope Adultery. Or the story of the woman caught in adultery. Now, if you have any sort of, and forgive me for how nerdy I'm going to get here for a minute, but we're going to talk about the textual history of the Bible, particularly of the New Testament, because I'm sure I'm not telling you any new information when I say that 2,000 years ago they didn't have Xerox machines. They didn't have printing presses. So the only way that they could replicate something like the story of Jesus according to John the Apostle was to hand copy it. And that meant a scribe sitting, looking at the original letter or the original story and copying it letter by letter, word by word, line by line, page by page. And if someone else wanted a copy, someone else had to make a copy of that. And as you can imagine, that process, that transcribing or copying process, was fraught with all kinds of challenges. Modern scholars have investigated the history of the writings of the New Testament. And most textual scholars agree that there are somewhere between 25 and 26,000 handwritten manuscripts representing part or all of the New Testament. Of these handwritten manuscripts, about 5,800 of them are in the Greek language. Over 10,000 of them are in Latin, and about 9,300 of them are in other languages like Coptic or Syriac or Armenian, and the Slavic languages. And in those 25 to 26,000 manuscripts, there are about 300,000 what are called textual variants. Now, that's something that happens if you're copying pages and pages of a letter. You can understand, and 95% of these textual variants are like somebody was writing, copying a word, and they mistook an A for an O or a U for a V. Most of the textual variants of these 300,000 variants are just simple miscopied letters. Sometimes there are words that are put in the wrong order, or the end of the word is missing, or you can understand that the scribe, he had a fight with his wife before he went to work that day. And so for the first couple hours that he was copying, he was kind of not really there. He wasn't paying attention. You can understand how those mistakes were made. So that most of the variants in the New Testament copies change nothing about the message or the teaching of the New Testament. In fact, one of the most influential New Testament scholars, and he's prolific, his name is D.A. Carson. And in 1979, D.A. Carson wrote this in an evaluation of the integrity of the King James Bible. He said this: "Nothing we believe to be doctrinally true, and nothing we are commanded to do, is in any way jeopardized by the variants. This is true for any textual tradition. The interpretation of individual passages may well be called into question, but never is a doctrine affected. Now, the interesting thing is the first 11 verses of the Gospel of John are recorded in 1,495 of those earliest manuscripts. Manuscripts that are dated well before 300 AD. There's 1,495 manuscripts that include the story of the pericope adulterae, the story of the woman caught in adultery. But there are 265 of them that don't have it. And the most troubling thing is, of those 265, most of them, including P66 and P75, and the oldest complete collection of the writings of the New Testament, which is called Codex Sinaiticus, which is dated around 300 AD. All of them, the earliest ones, the 265 or 267 of them, don't have the first 11 verses of the book of John, of the chapter of John chapter 8. Now, there are various reasons why that might have been omitted in those 267 of those copies. It was St. Ambrose of Milan and St. Augustine of Hippo. Perhaps you've heard of St. Augustine, who was one of the early church fathers, sometime around the beginning of around 400, 450 AD, had said that he believed that the reason that the story of the woman caught in adultery was eliminated from the text, and it's easy for us to understand how it happened. Because he believed, and I agree with him, that there was a scribe, perhaps 30 or 40 years after the time of Jesus, maybe just after the death of John, where he was transcribing the book of John, and he came to the story of the woman caught in adultery, and as he read through, he said, "This can't be right. It seems that Jesus is saying that adultery is okay." So he just decided, I just won't include it. And then the next copy didn't have it, and the next copy didn't have it, and pretty soon you have 100 copies that don't have it. Because you see, here's the thing. The church has always been the church. The church has always been that way. If you've been around church any length of time, you know that when we get uncomfortable or things hurt our feelings or things sort of ruffle our feathers, we're like, get it out of here. I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with this idea that Jesus may have actually sanctioned adultery. Now, as we process that, we have a tendency to bumper sticker our theology. And one of the ways that we bumper sticker our theology is we guard our righteousness with a saying. It says, "I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious." You ever heard anybody say that? And I understand what is intended by that. I'm spiritual, but not religious. But you see, we are. We all are. The Pharisees were. And what does it mean, though, really? If we really want to be spiritual and not religious, you want to look at what that means? Look at Jesus in John chapter 8. You see, the religious bureaucracy, the religious leaders of Jesus' day, it says they had come to trap him. He was teaching in the temple courts, and when it says they had come to trap him, they had come to marginalize him. They had come to discredit him. In the language of our day, they had come to cancel him. They had come to say, okay, we want this young radical rabbi to stop teaching what he's teaching, so let's discredit him. Let's marginalize his righteousness. So they brought to him a woman who was caught in adultery. They threw him at his feet, and they said, "What does the law of Moses? We know what the law of Moses says. What do you say?" And the fascinating thing is Jesus simply bends down, and it says he starts to write in the dust of the temple floor. This drove these religious leaders crazy. They lost their collective minds, and they demanded that he give them an answer. So he stood up and he said, okay, you want an answer? I will read to you the law. And he quotes from the book of Deuteronomy and the book of Leviticus. And the Torah law, the Mosaic Code, said that if you were going to carry out a capital crime, you had to be a witness to that crime. And the chief accuser who had witnessed that capital crime, they would be the only person who could cast the first stone. But Jesus puts his own spin on it. He says, I'm not talking about being religious here. I'm not talking about keeping the letter of the law. I'm talking about something more important. I'm talking about being truly spiritual, so that the one of you who has no sin, that's the one who's qualified to throw the first stone. That's what it means to be spiritual and not religious. That's truly what that means. What that means is that we're willing to look in the mirror before we look out the window. What that means is that but for the grace of God, there go I. Now, believe me, it is not the church that has a corner on the religion market. I believe that I am living, right now, we are living in one of the most religious times that I have ever experienced in my life. And I lived through the 1960s. So I know what it sounds like to have the voice of rebellion against the status quo and the establishment rise up. But what I'm hearing today is not rebellion. What I'm hearing is religion. You know, if you don't hear it, you're not paying attention. Just listen to the news, read the newspaper, go onto social media. Try to have a political debate today, even with people you know and like who you disagree with, and it will always descend into a discussion about right and wrong beliefs. That's the nature of religion. Religion ignores truth and reality and simply says, this is how I feel about what I believe. It's interesting that Jesus never broadcasts his accusations. He doesn't go toe-to-toe with the vocal religious leaders of his day. He just bends back down and continues to write in the dust. And it says that as he wrote in the dust, the religious leaders stood there for a while, and as they read what he was writing, they began to leave. From the eldest to the youngest. See, I used to believe that the older you got, the more curmudgeonly you became, and I'm working on that. My wife will tell you, I am becoming more and more curmudgeonly as I get older. But I'm more and more willing to understand there is a difference between what I feel and what I believe and what is true and what I know. And I'm amazed that it's the younger that I was, the more eager I was to violently defend what I believed. As I get older, I get a little wiser. And I realize there's a difference between truth and facts and feelings and belief. You see, we don't know what Jesus wrote in the dirt. We just don't know. It was blown away by the winds of time. He may have written down there the names of the lovers of the religious leaders. He may have written the amounts in their secret bank accounts. He may have uncovered something about each of them, and they knew exactly what he was writing. It would have been convicting enough if he just were writing their names in the dirt. But whatever he wrote there was true. See, what it means to be truly spiritual and not religious means that you are willing to seek the truth, regardless of how it makes you feel. See, it never says that the woman didn't commit adultery. It doesn't say it. It doesn't say she was presumed to have done this or she was accused of this. It simply says she was caught in the act. And Jesus never disagrees with that. He never pushes back on that idea. And as the religious leaders departed from the scene there in the temple, Jesus was left alone in front of the crowd that was watching with the woman. Now there's another spiritual bumper sticker, another theological bumper sticker that we like to define as characterizing our commitment here at Riverbend. And it's a bumper sticker that goes like this: love the sinner, hate the sin. Have you ever heard that? Love the sinner, hate the sin. I understand what that means. It's what Jesus is doing there. Jesus is making a difference between adultery and an adulterer. Jesus says to the woman, he says, where are the people who were accusing you? Is no one left to condemn you? And she gives him the wrong answer. She says, no one, sir. The right answer was only you. Because he was the only one who was qualified to pass judgment on her. But even though she gives him the wrong answer, he says, okay, but neither do I condemn you. And you see in that moment what Jesus is doing. Jesus is focusing on the sovereign, priceless value of the individual over the individual's actions. Then you could say it that way. You could say he is loving the sinner and hating the sin, because he doesn't say adultery is okay. Adultery is always wrong. Adultery is always a lie. It is always a deception. And adultery is 99% of the time destructive. He doesn't say adultery is okay, but he says you are forgiven for that act. And we look at that and we say, that's who we need to be. We need to be people who value individuals over more than the individual choices. But that is so hard to do. If you're a parent, you understand how hard that is. You understand how hard it is to love your children no matter what they do and not murder them. I have a visceral experience with this. I think it was over 35 years ago. There was a preschool little girl in our church in Richardson who was murdered. You really have not seen pain and grief and tragedy until you have been close to a family who has had a murdered child. And I remember being up close on that because the family who lost their daughter were members of our church. I had performed their wedding. The mother of the grandmother of the girl who was murdered, was a longtime member of our church and one of my favorite people. But what made it shockingly tragic was that this little girl was murdered by her own uncle, the brother of the little girl's mother, the son of the grandmother of the little girl. He pled out to capital murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And the last I knew of it, which was a number of years ago, his mother, every week, would drive from Dallas to West Texas to a federal penitentiary to visit her son. I remember talking to her many years ago about why she was doing that, and she gave me the standard answer. She said, I know he is a murderer, and he needs to be punished for taking my granddaughter from us. But he's also always my son, and he will never not be my son. And then she said, Dave, there are two kinds of prison. There's a kind of prison that we deserve and the kind of prison where John will be held for the rest of his life. But there's a kind of prison that I have been paroled from, and only I can be paroled from it. It's a prison of unforgiveness, and I refuse to remain in that. I mean, it's no simple thing. It's no small thing to be a church that says, we will value you as an individual, no matter what it is you have done. But that's not the most dangerous thing about Riverbend Church. The most dangerous thing about Riverbend Church are the last 6 words of this story, the last 6 words of John chapter 8, verse 11. And they are, pore, see, transcribal error. Pore, ao, apo, ton, nun, me, kenti, martane. Nope, martane. Right. Literally what this is go from the now, no longer or not sin. From now on, go and sin no more. Now, we understand this verse, or this phrase, to be a command, and that's correct, because these are imperative verbs. Jesus is commanding her, go and sin no more. And it's typical for churches, for religious communities, to say, that's what we're saying. Stop sinning. Stop the self-destructive behavior. Stop those corrosive things in your life. We come together to help each other do that. And typically, as churches, we're okay with the idea that you can have a backstory. You can have the most nefarious, heinous things in your past. I once was lost, but now I'm found. And we love to celebrate. But now I see. The reality is, as long as you're sinning, your corrosive behavior is in the past, we're going to throw a party and we're going to celebrate that. But what do we do with the people who are still in process? What do we do with the people who are still struggling? Do we say, oh, well, you're welcome here when you get your stuff together? You're welcome into this body. Because we do this. We do this. We say, come as you are, just as you are. And we say, we don't care where you've been, we don't care what you've come from, you're here now, and that's all that matters. And every church says that. Every church means to say that. They don't pull it off, because once you get in the doors, you clean yourself up, and you, even if you don't have your stuff together, you act like it. But that's not what makes Riverbend dangerous. What makes Riverbend, and what makes Riverbend a dangerous and difficult place is the nature of these 2 verbs. What the imperative really means when it says go and sin. I have a friend who, well, he's not really a friend. He was my favorite professor in graduate school. And he is a nerd of the highest order. In fact, he's such a nerd that he wrote a Greek grammar. Who does that? Who writes a grammar for another language, and a language that is not currently spoken on the earth? It's not the same as current Greek. This is Koine Greek grammar. He wrote this book. I can barely read parts of it, but he's brilliant. And this is what my friend Dan Wallace says about the imperative mood. Listen to this carefully. The imperative mood is a mood of intention. It is the mood furthest removed from certainty. Ontologically, as one of the potential or oblique moods in the Greek language, the imperative moves in the realm of volition and possibility. You want to know literally what Jesus was saying to that woman? He wasn't saying a threat or a command, go and sin no more or else. He was saying, now, you have the possibility to go and no longer do this. you are free. You know what it's like to live your life and not believe there is anything but that life, but that struggle, but that tragedy. The message of this place is that there is always the possibility to begin again. There is always the invitation for transformation. The reality of the danger of the mission of Riverbend to be the church for people who don't like church is this one idea. Are you ready for it? Because you got to buckle up. Because even if you've been here a long time, you may not realize that this is our mission. Our mission is to tell people you no longer have to live enslaved to the wounds or to the destructive behavior or the addictions that you are suffering with. That is our message. That is our invitation. But here is the expectation that you are welcome here even if you never change. That's what he was saying to this woman. We don't know how the story ends. We don't. She evaporates from the pages of the Bible. She's gone from history. And we don't know whether she went back to the life she was living before because she knew nothing else. But all we know is that he invited her in the same way we are invited. You don't have to anymore. And we will welcome you even if you never change. And I understand how impossible that is. That is truly opening a butcher shop for vegans. That is truly selling neckties at a nudist colony. That is truly serving ham sandwiches at a bar mitzvah. It does not make sense. Because it can be a bridge too far. It can be too much to ask. And I understand we have to be real about, I can't go with you anymore. Your brokenness, your dysfunction, your destructive behavior is costing me too much. But that's the risk we have to take. Because there's one person among us who has no such limitations. And that's the star of John chapter 8. That's Jesus. You want to know the blueprint for Riverbend Church? I believe we are called to be the church of the John 8, Jesus. Now, I also believe something else that might bother some of you. I believe, and I have no proof of this, but I believe this, that I am perhaps the most theologically conservative person in this church. I'm card-carrying old school, folks. I will sign the Apostles' Creed. I will repeat the Westminster Confession. I am what I call a buffet Calvinist. That means I pick and choose from Calvinism the things I like. I leave the rest there. But I'll put my hand on the Bible and I will swear that I believe that there is a loving and forgiving and gracious all-knowing God, and that his son was named Jesus, and that he did in fact die and raise again, and that he's coming. And that the hope of heaven is real. And that book, that inspired Bible is a powerful tool that allows me to look through the lens of the Bible to see myself and to see the world in ways that I would never see without it. And I believe these things. But you know what else I believe? I believe I was born to be here. In that same kind of Calvinistic DNA, I believe it was my destiny. From the time I was a young boy through my adolescence, through my nerdy theological training, through the 40 years of pastoral ministry, I believe that I was called to be here. And I believe that in the same way that I believe what I believe about Texas. I wasn't born here, but I got here as fast as I could. And I pray every day that I would be the pastor this church deserves. And I wish I were the spiritual leader that this church needs and that this city is looking for. But I'm what you've got. This is it. All I can give you is my best. Because I believe I was destined to be here, called to be here. You know why? Because I love the mission of this place. I believe in it. I am completely willing and eager to dedicate my life to being a part of a place, to being part of a church that is a church for people who have been bruised and battered and broken and bored by the church, who have been wounded by it, who have been cast aside from it, who are bored with it, who just aren't interested in it, who think that there is nowhere where they fit in. I believe that this is the place where I belong, a place of misfits and outcasts, of renegades and dissidents. This is the church of the John 8 Jesus, Riverbend Church, the church that I call my home. And I'm thankful that you do as well. Next week, I'm going to talk about further on in John chapter 8, and we're going to wrestle with the idea of why is it better to be light than right. But that's all I got for today. This is the total download. As they say, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. So as you go, I pray that you will bless others as you have been blessed. Class dismissed. See you next Sunday.